What I wanted to say and thank you for was the wonderful workshop that you hosted yesterday with Ashwini.
Which
was sold out. So
absolutely
that's why you're such an important part of this big weekend.
Yeah, and it's great to be able to have artists like Ashwini, and especially because I can already tell the influence that she had there yesterday is going to be a catalyst for the next year for so many members, even the folks that weren't there. Just the remnants of her work that's there. Even today, the buzz and what people are looking at. And I was joking with her the other day about how now I'm going to have to stock that clay because people seeing it. So thank you, Ashwini, and thank you, Layson and Lucy.
Thank you, Mike.
This was amazing.
Yeah, so that's a great way to segue into an introduction for Ashwini Bhat, who I can hardly see back there, but it's because of the lighting, I think. So,
she's a giant.
Yeah, what'd you say?
She's a giant of a woman.
She is in every way. So thank you so much for your affiliation with us, and we're so pleased to give you your first solo exhibition here, which comes on the heels of us seeing you in your solo exhibition at the Newport Art Museum, and and us meeting you in the show that Steve Albert curated last year, Through the Eyes of a Collector. So we're so pleased to have this wonderful body of work, and which includes 5 series, and you're going to tell us about that. I'm just going to give a few little words of background, which you can add to. Yeah. Okay. Ashwini was born on the continent of India. She spent at least 15 years involved with classical dance, both studying and being a professional dancer. She has a master's degree in literature, and once you touch clay, like so many of us, she fell in love with it and went to Ray Meeker's place
in
Pondicherry called the Golden Bridge.
Mm-hmm. Golden Bridge Pottery.
Yes, I knew there was another word. And so that's how you got your start. You've been living in the U.S. since 2015, working as a ceramic sculptor and collaborating with artists in other mediums. You live in Petaluma with your wonderful partner, Forrest, who we're so glad is here too. I think that's the background part a little bit. This is a wonderful exhibition in which you talk about the interdependencies of the species and how we all are more alike than not. We had a wonderful essay written by Glenn Adamson, who is the scholar at Yale. He's a writer and curator, and as Glenn said, you're a most articulate narrator of your journey as a sculptor. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you.
I hope I didn't leave too much of it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You fill it in.
Hi. Looks like most of the audience is different from yesterday, so I do want to take a couple of minutes to thank a few people once again, mainly Lucy and Lyson. So about a year ago, when I mentioned to them that I want to show a body of new work, I was just beginning to make them, and it's kind of work I was getting towards for a while, and that's what I want to show. They had no clue what I was showing, but they had complete trust in the work and belief in me, so really thank you for that. And thank you to Forrest Gander. It's been a perfect collaboration in work, life, and love. I'm grateful you're in my life. Thanks to Steve Alpert, who reintroduced my work to Lucy through the last group show. So I'm kind of here today because of you, Steve. Thanks. Yeah. And thanks for all of you to making the time on a Sunday afternoon to be here. I'll try to keep, I have my timer on, and I'll try to keep the talk within 20 minutes, and I really like questions. You can ask me I come from a background of dance and literature. I started studying Bharatanatyam, which is the southern Indian classical style of dance, at the age of about 7. I think I'm 8 or 9 here. I continued studying Bharatanatyam for the next 15 to 18 years and later joined a contemporary dance company. Very different from my initial training. Extremely modern, minimalistic, extremely slow movements, and a lot of place for improvisation. So although the background was in traditional classical dance, I was really drawn to the experimentation which was being done in the contemporary dance world. I worked with that company for about 5 years, and the more I performed, it felt like it was not my material. There was some kind of disconnect with the way I wanted to live my life and the way I wanted to bring my practice into my everyday living, which brought me to Pondicherry, which was just about 3 hours away from my dance company. I knew Ray Meeker's work. The only reason, well, 2 reasons why I came into clay was I wanted to become Ray's student. He was an architect who came into clay, so my entry point to clay was Ray making 12-foot tall giant sculptures. So that alone, using the clay with so much freedom, was very attractive. The second reason was I thought if I was leaving behind something I've done my entire adult life, I would better start at ground zero. So clay felt like the right material to try. But within 3 months of working with clay, there was no looking back. It also felt like the preoccupations I shared with the new material and my previous career was pretty much the same. I constantly looked for what would happen if bodies came together. I always worked on series. The sculptures always evolved together as if they were conversing with each other. Every piece of mine has equal importance to the negative space. That's super important to me as well. What happens when 2 bodies come together? What's that energy in between does to the actual bodies? But at the same time, the material now was outside of my body, and that itself was really liberating. I could use the clay, reuse the clay, stretch it any way I wanted. I beat around the clay pretty much I'm on the floor most of the time when I'm working. And that ability to reuse the clay and not break any real bones was super liberating. And also the quality of the clay, from being so soft to turning into almost stone-like quality, was really attractive in the sense of visualizing the form. I was drawn to the physical rigor of the wood-firing world. We used wood mainly because it was the cheapest and most reliable source of fuel. That's how it started, but Ray was interested in building an anagama kiln. He built the first anagama kiln of the country. Actually, even to this date, 10 years later, that's probably the only functioning anagama kiln in the country. My travels started in order to fire as many anagamas and other wood kilns as possible. We were about 4 or 5 people who were interested in the anagama aesthetic. It was a huge kiln, impossible to fill it and fire it enough to get enough result back. So I initially traveled to Tasmania for a woodfire conference, met a bunch of artists from Asheville, North Carolina, and that's how my journey started. From 2011 to almost towards the end of 2017, I lived a nomadic life, living out of 2 suitcases, hopping residencies, meeting a bunch of wonderful artists, collaborating, firing the kilns, cooking for 40 people, or just hanging by a burning kiln, sharing stories. That has been...
Can you go back to the last one and can you say a little about that connection to the body that you're...
Yeah,
Are you
going
gonna
to
get
come
there?
to that because most of, especially the Alive series, that's where it starts. So I will come
Okay.
to that. Most of my inspiration comes from geology, archaeology, looking at and thinking about movement, balance, dance. Element of dance is definitely a big part of my work. The way I work, some of you saw me work yesterday. I'm most of the time in almost like a sumo wrestler position. That has also saved my back over time. But I'm using the floor and the connection of my body with the material. So it's most of the time it's like the clay stretches almost like it's an extension of my arm itself. And the more I worked on large scale work, the connection with the human body and the work became much more closer. Many times I address parts of my sculpture as the legs and the hip and the armpit and the arm and the neck, and so the connection with the body is almost direct. I also, because of the travels, each place has contributed to the kind of work I've made in the last few years. Element of place I inhabit, bringing that element into the work is very important to me. Recently when I went to Japan, this is the work I made in Shigaraki. You can see some of the elements recurring, the curls, extended coils. They are from a divinity, female divinity shrine from Syria. And the Harappan headdresses you have seen in the previous images, that comes from Indus Valley civilization, which is now part of Pakistan, what used to be part of India. And when I was in Japan, certain elements which I saw, which you can see in the corner, most of the shrines, small shrines in Japan, have these stone lanterns at the entrance to the temple, and they have a certain opening. Some have 2 openings, some have 1, and they were apparently used to light a lamp at the end of the day. So those elements started coming into the work. And I was looking for a glaze which would remind one of a flame or fire. So usually people go to Japan to do wood firing. I did my first oxidation firing in Japan. So it's kind of a turning point in my life in the sense of not limiting myself to a technique which I knew very well and trying to explore. I almost started experimenting with glazes for the first time. So that was definitely the turning point. Soon after that is when I moved to California, and that brought in more colors, which you see in the new work as well. This is with the Shigaraki collection right now. So that's the idol from Syria. It's from a female divinity shrine. the axe head is from the headdresses from Harappan civilization. And the surface, I brought in some element of South India. This is symbol of a phallic symbol for Shiva, who is worshipped everywhere in South India. And the element of the lamp, the slit, which I also kind of referred to as the female part of the piece, almost in interaction with the male aspect of the piece. That comes from the Japanese toros, which are the stone lanterns. It's the finished piece. I often collaborate with artists from other medium. It really pushes me out of my comfort zone. What I enjoy most about those collaborations are the process itself. This is a collaboration, I think Lucy saw that first in Newport Museum. It's a collaboration with Forrest Gander. This particular installation was part of the first Indian ceramic triennale in 2018 in Jaipur. So we got a curved wall instead of a straight wall, which really changed the whole perspective, and I had to change the installation a little bit. And installations are anyway a performance every time. Here are some details. This is a piece I made in UMass Dartmouth for, it's a commission piece for the New Bedford Historical Society. Hopefully, they are working on a national park in New Bedford. Hopefully in a couple of years, if you're passing through New Bedford, you'll be able to see it installed in the park. I have an upcoming collaboration with Forrest Gander again at the Cohen Gallery in Brown University, coming up pretty soon. Kind of influenced by the Sangam period of art and literature, which dates to 300 BCE to 300 AD. In South India, a lot of the temple architecture and poetry and painting was almost like a revolution, renaissance for the arts. So we have traveled there and documented things in our several travels, and the collaboration is based on that. So most potters have so much history to fall back on and to take reference from. So over the years, the first question I'm being asked is, what is the story behind the work? And I never really think about in terms of a story. I always have a context. So I have started taking down notes in terms of maybe there are aspects which are sometimes direct, but sometimes they influence my work a few years later on. But it's always good to have those notes to refer back to. So this body of work especially is happening around the time, to give you a brief context. I'm in one place after almost 7 years of nomadic life. I'm sleeping on the same bed. My clothes are no longer coming out of a suitcase. And I have a rhythm of waking up, working, sleeping. And I'm in California. I fall completely in love with the California landscape. And I'm exploring the landscape with my partner. And around the same time, the political situation in this country and my home country are just so fucked up. And I'm trying to take a break from the newspaper, but that doesn't really help because you know that's happening. I'm from a place where are 10,000 gods. I'm not a believer in any god. So my closest belief system comes from the nature around me. So that became my refuge point in some sense. And around the same time, I was reading The Hidden Life of Trees. It's a pretty famous book. So certain things which kind of stayed with me. If a tree falls in the forest, there are other trees listening. You know, half the time I'm listening to this book on audio book while I'm working, and I'm tearing up. I'm growing old and getting super emotional very easily, and I love it. I love how vulnerable it has made me and how that is coming into my work. And at the same time, I'm a little too late in life, but I discovered Lynn Margulis. Gia is a tough bitch. I'm like, okay, this really works for me. So around the same time, we decided to do a research trip to Grand Canyon. We hiked down all the way to the bottom, stay there for 2 nights, and that Colorado River, everything started with 1 trickle of water. Being persistent, going by drop, creating that humongous canyon, which no photograph makes any justice. And you can also not see any human beings after about a mile. Nobody wants to go down there. We were a small group of people, 5 of us, going down, and you turn around and it's all the materials which I use in my everyday practice. The layers accumulated over billions of years, sandstone, lime. I'm like, okay, this is what I need. I need these colors. We are, as humans, we are multiple layers. This is what multiple layer looks like. This is what years of multiple layers accumulation looks like. And I need to bring that into my work. Also, we went to see the giant sequoia forest. There's no way to get the whole tree in a frame. So as you can see, I'm doing a flip phone action just to catch the top of the tree. And that guy, General Sherman Tree, he's been standing there for 45 fucking years, just
45.
Watching everything.
40?
No.
4,500.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, 4,500 years, yeah. So around the same time, I was looking at every tree root, and I read an article about how Native Americans also used trees as land markers. They used to actually bend a tree, and that used to be your arrow mark to follow the road. So, and in this deep, dense forest, you can actually see where the sunlight comes from just by watching the behavior of the tree. So these elements slowly came into the work. If you see this image and the next image, you can see how the influence is almost direct. But I have to bring in that almost creaturely animal or human kind of aspect to it. So I'm deeply inspired by the nature, but I'm not interested in literally reproducing it. I will see a mushroom, I won't make a mushroom, but I would want to read about the mushroom. Oh, talking about mushrooms, around the same time, my partner was in a collaboration with a bunch of mushroom biologists and critics, and getting lost in the wilderness of Wisconsin, at least that's what he told me. And he would come back home with stories of what they found, hundreds of images. So definitely all this has come into the new work. This is some images, imprints from the Grand Canyon. I want to believe that the ripples on the left are left by some giant lizard, at least in my imagination, that's what it is. I've been firing, I started with firing the feldspar in Appomattox, Virginia. I was at a residency there, and out in the middle of nowhere, there's nothing to do. All the material you want are in your backyard. I used to go with a bucket and a shovel to get the clay, and the last thing I wanted was to get stung by all the wasps around me. But very soon I realized that they have no interest in me. They were interested in the material I was interested in. So I started thinking, okay, if we both are coming to the same source, then probably I could fire the mud daubers. So the wasps don't reuse the nest. Once they are done with the nests fall down, and you can find them. You go on a walk and you find the feldspar and the wasp nests everywhere. I started collecting them, and the table started accumulating stuff, and I had to add an extra table. And the colors came later on when I moved to California, but I still continue firing. I kind of have tried firing at least 3 or 4 different kinds of stones. Now I have 3 shelf full of a new set of stones, all collected by my boyfriend, who gets these rocks for me, and I fire it. Some goes back into it. So this is how it looked at the corner of my table, and they slowly started coming into the work. And I often mix, I don't particularly, I understand technical point of what clay fires at what temperature, but when you start making sculpture, certain new freedom comes your way where you don't have to worry about whether the glazes are food safe, and whether it's going to explode or crack, or how is it going to look when it is cracked. So I like that freedom. So this piece alone has 3 different red clays, and some of the red clay has been added more grog, just hand wedged, just to see the contrast between the smooth and the rough surface, and the mud dauber nest in the center. Some nuts and bolts, and some high firing porcelain. So all together, I'm interested in how they shrink together or not. If they crack, how are they going to crack, and what it does to the form. So that kind of element of surprise is super important in my studio practice. Some of the pieces, the Alive series and The Beginning is the End, came from around the same time, but also responding to the California fire. I still had everything I owned in this country in like 5 cardboard boxes, and I hadn't even opened them, and there was this big Sonoma fire just about 20 miles away from us, which made me, there's so much articles coming about addressing this. Why is this happening? Is this global warming or not? Has this happened all through the history of mankind? But in several readings, I came to read about these ceratoneous cones, especially the jack pine cones, which have, they are like a pouch. So on the left are the jack pine cones, and this is the jack pine cone opened up post fire. So the jack pine cones need the forest fire for the resin to melt, for the seeds to explode into the ground. So in some ways, the death of certain kind is also the birth of certain kind. Of course, that kind of thought is a major part of most philosophies, Hinduism, Buddhism. You'll find similar ideas too, but for me, it hit me directly when I came across these jack pine cones. So some of the pieces of the beginning is the end and the alive came out of there. But the more I worked on, sorry, the head is cut. I always start at a point, so there was some reminiscence of the way the jack pine cone looks like a pouch was definitely starting point of the alive for me, but it quickly changes once I start touching the material and slapping it around, stretching it. Something else happens, the material kind of guides me where I need to go. And perhaps the movement element, I started looking at crevices, what happens when you bend a hand. I absolutely love this part when you bend. Is there a name for that? I don't know. The part where the thigh meets the rest of the body, the neck, what happens when you bend the neck? Those are the connections kind of started coming into the alive piece, and that's the reason why I am showing also the pieces as an extension of the body. I want those crevices and the folds to directly talk to the folds in my own skin. And there's also a slight element of, I'm not a yoga freak at all, although I'm from India. That's too slow for me. But there's one posture, the cat-cow. I use that just to release my back as part of my stretching. And that's always a beautiful stretch for me. It's almost like you're conserving all your energy only to open out and release. And people have said, oh, this holds the energy in, you know, when they have seen the alive pieces. For me, it's one step ahead. Yes, it holds the energy in only to kind of, it might burst out and bite your hand at any point. There were quite a few people yesterday who wanted to put their finger in one of the alives. And I tell them, okay, at your own risk. If it bites you, I'm not responsible. So although I'm using wild clay and natural material, and I didn't want to limit myself to only one technique of making or finishing or firing or the surface treatments. So when I moved to California, every clay was new to me. So for almost 7 to 8 months, all I did was test 17 to 20 different clay bodies. Textiles, slips, glazes, every combination I can possibly make. And in order to get results really fast, I started firing my tiny electric kiln. And I really fell in love with the process. So that's what I bring to most of these works, where most of the work in this room have been fired multiple times. Some have glaze in them, some post-glazing, post-firing get sandblasted, and they get another layer of glaze and get refired. Some get cold finished with a tiny tinge of spray paint. Some have, especially the beginning is the end series has, I discovered glass and garnet medium just by using a sandblaster. I was like, oh my God, this material is so beautiful. It can't be used just to take a layer off. I need to build a layer on with this material. So that's how that started coming.
Wait, where is this?
The beginning is the end has a tiny surface of white and brown. That is an added layer of garnet and glass medium. It's fine dust, glass dust. I'm someone who is super drawn to dark clays. I've never really worked with white clays before. Dark clays remind me of my birthplace, so I'm immediately drawn to that. But there was a moment in one of the hikes with the forest in Point Reyes where it's just a pile of foam from the water, whatever the water is bringing in, and it leaves the foam back, and there was this lump at this corner, and it was so windy that this whole lump was shaking so beautifully. It was almost like a creature which could jump at you. So I had started working on the ghost prints in my studio with the red clay, but the moment I saw this, I said, okay, I need something white. So I started working with porcelain clay. It was a little too white for me. Then I added the paper to it, so that's porcelain paper clay, the fossil series you see, but I need to play this if it plays. I felt like a 6-year-old kid. I wanted to eat it up like a cotton candy. But yeah, so that's what made me go and explore it. So the moment it was shaking, while it was shaking, it almost had like a translucent quality. It showed all kinds of grass and shells underneath it, which you probably wouldn't have seen if it wasn't shaking. So I thought, okay, to bring in the fossil series, I think I'll go and work with a lighter, paler clay. And even on this, you see a fine dust at some points. So some of them have glaze, some part of it is naked clay, and the tinge of gray and a different white you see is basically the fine glass dust. I'm from Puttur, west coast, southwest coast. It's so small that I could not find an Indian map which has Puttur, so I decided to add it. I was born in Puttur. I stayed there till I was 16. I left home at 16. I've been the black sheep of the family, and my family has been super supportive, even at times when they have had no clue what the hell I'm doing. So I'm super thankful to them. So from Puttur, I go to Bangalore to do my master's. From there, I moved to Chennai to practice my dance. Eventually end up in Pondicherry. I end up building a house in Pondicherry made out of rammed earth. I build a wood kiln in the backyard. I fire it a dozen times, and that's when my travel started. And now, starting this year, I'm part of a maker space called Barn 5400 in Petaluma, right next to Lagunitas Brewery, if you ever come that side. But I feel fortunate to be part of an excellent team of makers. I have this new studio with a small gallery in front of it, and a kiln shed with my name written all over, which you can see from the highway. Thank you.
Questions?